Hello, everyone. And now on to our next guest, which is a young and dynamic speaker, Tulsi Doshi. Tulsi is the head of product for Google's responsible AI and human centered technology organization. In this role, she leads the development of Google wide improvements, resources, and best practices for developing more inclusive and ethical products. Tulsi has been recognized as one of the top women in AI ethics and serves as an AI ethics advisor to growing Insurtech called Lemonade. She holds a BS in Symbolic Systems and an MS in Computer Science from Stanford University. Please welcome Doshi.
Hey everyone, nice to see all of you. I guess good evening to those of you who are in the United States, and maybe good morning or afternoon to those in other places. Super excited to be here and to be chatting with you. And it was great to hear Kurt. I think so many interesting points there. So hopefully some of them will overlap with some of the things I'll be talking about today, and others will just be good fodder for more discussion. So let me share my screen. If I can, let's see here, share screen. Da-da-da. Let's see if that works. All right. Hopefully you can see my screen. I'm going to assume that is yes, but someone ping the comments or the chat if you cannot see the screen.
Yeah, I've added it to the stream, so they can see it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, so what I'll do, and I know we're a bit over time, so I'll try and keep this somewhat brief so we can also, and if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to put them in the comments chat, and we'll try to touch on them as well. As Shilpi mentioned, I am the head of product for Responsible AI at Google, which means that I work across our product teams to think about how do we build more inclusive, more responsible, more thoughtful products. And we're talking about products that affect billions of users across the globe in many different ways. How do we think about users, creators, advertisers? How do we think about users from different communities and different backgrounds who might use products in different ways or have different use cases? And so for me, a lot of what I think about is how do we set up not just products that can build better experiences for users, but the processes such that we can continue to do this for every product that we build, every product that we launch, every time we make a change or an improvement. So today what I'll do is set a little bit of the stage and then talk about kind of three high-level lessons that we've learned as we've started to do this. And of course, we are still learning so much. There's still so much to do in terms of how we build more inclusive, more responsible products. So, at a high level, starting with this example, because I always think it's important to ground it in what are we really trying to do, right? Building inclusive products fundamentally is about enabling every single user to feel seen and to feel heard, right? We want every single user who visits a product or who uses an experience or who engages in an environment to feel like the experience is built and made for them. And to be able to achieve their goals and to achieve their needs in that experience. And I really love, in this new line of Barbie dolls from last year as an example of that. It's a multi-dimensional view of what it means to be fashionable, what it means to be beautiful. And while you can see that manifested in this physical product, that's an experience and a reaction we want manifested in our existing products, right? And this is not just about technology or about new products being developed. I love this tweet from 2019 because it's about a man who is wearing a Band-Aid for the first time that actually matches his skin color. And it's amazing because until I read this tweet, I didn't even realize Band-Aids were supposed to match skin color, because for me, that was never an experience I actually had. And so how many of us experience technology in a certain way without even realizing that it could work or should work better for us, right? And you develop hacks, you develop ways of engaging with technology that work for you because you have to, or you stop using it altogether because it doesn't work. So, the underlying mission behind all of this is how do we build products that evoke this sentiment in every single one of our users? And when you start getting into, machine learning, as Kurt alluded to, and as others I think have throughout the day, the challenge, of course, is that the process is complex, right? We're talking about data collection, data labeling, then training, Then there's some sort of, filtering or aggregation or ranking that leads to some sort of product experience. Users then see it, and then they have behavior that then informs that collection, right? So if you think about, for example, a recommender system like YouTube recommendations or ads or something else, you might have collection of data from how users engage with the product, from whether or not something matches a search query that someone types in. That data then gets labeled based on that engagement. The model is then trained. Then you have filtering or aggregation or ranking of that content. Users then see it. That behavior informs through. And at every step of this process, you can have bias enter the system, right? You can have bias enter the system in the way you collect the data. What users did you collect it from? Where did you choose to collect it from? How did you collect it? You can have bias in the way that you label that data, in the way that you train the model, in the way that the users actually see and perceive the data, in the ways that they then engage with it, which then goes back into the way that you collect the data, right? And so because human bias can enter this at any stage of the process, there isn't a one size fits all solution to fairness, because there isn't necessarily a single place in which concerns might intervene or a single place in which you might want to make a change. This is also true when you think about other responsible concerns like safety, privacy, security, right? These concerns can enter at any part of the pipeline and also multiple parts of the pipeline, which means that the way that they actually manifest to end users might be different, and the way we might go about it might be different. And so we've seen that in our products as well. Here are 3 examples, but there are countless of different ways you have to think about and address concerns. On the technical side, we've seen with a lot of our camera products, and especially ones that are focused on, face match or entering users like the Nest Hub Max, that we want to make sure these products work across diverse skin tones. We want to make sure that no matter who you are, you can easily access your device, but also that your device is secure for you and actually protects. Based on this, we actually found that we had to sample more data. We had to collect more training data, and we also had to evaluate our model and improve its performance across skin tone and across perceived genders, as well as the intersection of those two, to make sure that our product truly worked in a way that we felt proud of. But that's very different from another product like Gmail Smart Reply. In the case of Gmail, we found that we had these smart reply suggestions, right? So someone would send you an email, and then we would suggest 3 quick responses that you could just quickly respond. And someone would get an email saying, hey, did your engineer take vacation? And the answer would be, yes, she did. Or yes, he did. With the assumption that an engineer translates to being male. Now, the question is, okay, is that a modeling bias? Yes. But is the solution to make the model better? Not necessarily, right? In this case, we actually found that we weren't even comfortable with the idea of a better model, because gender is not binary. And just because you might see something more commonly, or you might be able to figure out a better or more accurate model, doesn't mean we actually want to perpetuate ideas of binary gender. And we actually decided instead that we would remove all gendered suggestions, and we would only suggest things that were more generic in their nature, because we felt like that was actually a more equitable product experience. So that's an example of a policy decision. And on the right, you see examples where we actually change things from a UX or a UI perspective. So you might be able to make the model better or make things better from a data collection or a technical standpoint. You may be able to change the policy. You may also want to see the end experience. Users very rarely interact directly with your model, right? There's some wrapper around that. There's some user experience that they're engaging with. And in the case of Google Translate, we actually found that user experience was really what we wanted to lean into. Google Translate has long had concerns around gender bias in translations, especially between languages that are gendered and non-gendered, right? So for example, if I say, Tulsi is my friend, in English, the word friend is non-gendered. In Spanish, that would actually turn into amiga, right? Qualifying my gender. But what if we don't actually know what the gender is when the sentence is in English? And we found that Often, it was perpetuating gender biases and stereotypes related to professions, translating doctor to male, nurse to female. And so when we think about, okay, how do we actually make this more effective for users? Again, we could make the model better? Yeah, and make it more accurate. And that's something we actively are working on. But we also, again, realized that because gender is non-binary and also very personal, the name Tulsi could be a woman. It could also be someone who goes by a non-binary gender. It also could be someone who is male. And so in that case, how do we know how to translate this approach? So instead, we give users a choice. Here in that mock on the screen, you see that the word friend gets translated both to amigo, masculine, and amiga, feminine, allowing the user to actually decide what is the approach they want to take, what is the context that they have that maybe the model doesn't have. And the reason I'm walking you through these 3 use cases is because I want to highlight just how different the responsible AI approaches are that we took. And in 2 of the cases, these are not actually even directly affecting the end model that is being used, but affecting the way that the user engages with the model. And so when we think about how do we build responsible AI, it's about looking at that entire pipeline, starting from the beginning all the way to the end, and how we adapt throughout. So if it is so not one size fits all and so diverse in terms of the way that we can approach our products, how do we actually build that in? How do we set up a culture, if you will, of starting to build these changes into our products and into the way that we develop? And so there's 3 things that I'll lightly touch on. 1 is building a shared vocabulary. The second, lowering barriers to entry. And the third, accountability. So what do I mean by building a shared vocabulary? Well, 3 years ago, we released the AI principles, which are 7 principles of what we believe AI should do, and 4 principles of applications that we at Google would never pursue. And it's interesting because if you read these AI principles, they both provide a valuable scaffold, but are also very generic, right? So you see things like be socially beneficial. 2, avoid creating or reinforcing unfair bias. 3, be built and tested for safety. Be accountable to people. Incorporate privacy design principles. These Google principles don't necessarily prescribe exactly how these things should be done. But what we found that they've done is create a shared vocabulary around the organization of things that we value in our products, things that we expect to see when products go to launch, things that we want to be measuring and evaluating. And while we don't have all the answers for how to do all of these things for every single one of our products, it provides motivation for our product managers, for our engineers, for our research scientists to ensure that these are baked into that product development process. We've also found, though, that these challenges can be rough. It's not always clear what type of challenge or what type of improvement to make. And so what we've found is that we've had to be incremental and iterative to truly understand individual product needs and context. Often, we need to do foundational research. We need to work with communities to understand real user needs across different community groups. We need to understand how to think about concepts like skin tone, right? Or gender. We need to also understand technical concepts, right? How do we actually make a model more accurate for different slices of communities? So we actually think about that foundational research and then try to put it in practice into a product. And often we find that when we put the foundational research into practice and product, it doesn't work the first time. We actually have to iterate on it, make differences, make changes. Once we're actually able to land a change then in a product, then we can say, okay, how do we actually scale those insights? How do we take what we learned and turn it into something that can truly lower the barrier to entry for our organization so that more people can build off of this? Let me walk you through an example of how that actually works. So we have a bunch of classifiers across the industry at Google and across the industry at large that aim to identify things like hate, harassment, abuse, spam, right? You want to make sure that, for example, you filter out horrible content that might be offensive or extremely low quality. And so we have this classifier that we released externally called the toxicity classifier, the Perspective API. And what it does is it takes a sentence and it classifies the level of toxicity from a scale of 0 to 1. So if you have the sentence, "What a sweet puppy, I want to hug her forever," that gives you a score of 0.07. If you say, "You're the worst example of a puppy I've ever seen," which is a really mean thing to say to a puppy, that's a score of 0.84, right? Seems reasonable, want to be able to filter out hateful content. But what happens when that goes wrong? And here you see an example that a user uncovered. When you had the sentence, "I am straight," gave the score of 0.07. The sentence I am gay got a score of 0.84. And so the question we started asking ourselves was, how do we proactively improve classifiers? How do we make sure that we evaluate our classifiers for these problems and we also proactively improve them to ensure that these types of issues can't happen, right? That we catch them and that we prevent them from our models. And so that led us over time to do this set of work, starting with foundational research, where we actually identified a set of model training techniques that could prevent a model from learning these types of associations towards a particular group. And our research team worked on developing these techniques. We published research papers, developed metrics. Then we actually looked at our products and we said, okay, can we actually use these techniques in our products? And we tried adversarial training in a number of content classifiers across Google. And we found issues with stability. We actually realized that the approach doesn't work in all cases and that it actually affected our overall product's ability to perform. And we had to iterate on the technique and develop a new technique called the min-diff loss function, which we found was much more effective at both improving our models and maintaining overall product performance. And so then we said, okay, how do we scale this? How do we make sure that multiple classifiers across the company are leveraging these techniques, are evaluating their models, especially if there's similar use cases? Can we apply similar learnings? And so we actually developed this into a TensorFlow library. And actually, when I developed this slide, it was to be released. The library has actually now been released. And we're actually now using it in various places across the company. And of course, this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution either. There are some cases in which we don't want to use this library. And so we've also had to work very thoughtfully on guidance around when we're comfortable using this and when we want to be careful and when we don't believe it's actually the right solution. Another example is model cards. Model cards have actually taken on a larger role in the industry at broadly, thinking about transparency. How do you actually document the limitations of your model as well as their value, so that you can have an honest conversation with your team, with potential users, with academics and regulators, being able to share what works and what doesn't work so that we're having honest experiences with our models. In 2018, the first paper was published around the model cards for transparency and how to operationalize these methods for ML fairness, transparency, accountability. We then actually tried them in product. And we found out the model cards were a lot harder to build than we thought. While they were very valuable as a concept, we needed to better understand how we support teams in actually getting all of those different pieces of documentation in place. And so as we learned how to do that, as we got more clarity, we actually built the model card toolkit, which simplifies the creation of model cards. And we released that also externally and are using it internally as well to make it easier and easier to create these types of artifacts. Before I continue, I do want to touch on the comment in the chat around a shared vocabulary, which I think it's very true, right? If you have terms that are too ambiguous, you may find yourself in a place where not everyone is actually sharing the same language, right? And the same definition, and can also modify those terms to their use. And so I think one of the things that we are doing is both trying to expound with case studies what we mean by these terms, right? So when we talk about fairness, what does that actually mean? Providing color through examples and through scenarios, trying to do trainings internally to make sure that we share that language and not just the terms, but also what we intend for them to mean and what that should mean for product teams. And then working with individual product teams and organizations like YouTube or Photos or Pixel to say, okay, what does this mean for our product? How do we take these high-level definitions and vocabulary and turn them into something more tangible? And that means also, throughout the life cycle, how we actually ask questions, right? We want every team to be thinking through, both from starting with product definition to eventually deployment and monitoring. What are the problems we're actually trying to solve? Who is the intended user? How is the training data collected? How is the model trained? How is it tested and evaluated? How is it deployed and monitored? And what are the limitations of the model? Which goes back again to this concept of model cards and really documenting those needs. So throughout that process, that hopefully helps even continue to clarify vocabulary, right? What questions should we be asking? How do those questions map to the overall standards we're setting? The last thing I just want to touch on is this idea of accountability. we want to make sure that we lower the barrier to entry, that we think about how to partner with our product teams, that we better understand how to solve these problems. But we also need to be able to create processes that allow us to support teams and understand them. So we think about intake. How do we triage requests for review and identify the relevant AI principles? Then we look at precedents. We talk to internal experts on privacy, security, fairness. We then actually conduct evaluations, right? We evaluate metrics. We talk to external advisors as we need. We make adjustments and mitigate. And then we might approve or we might block. And based on that, we may decide new precedents and new approaches that we may take moving forward. And so this is both a combination of being proactive in setting the vocabulary and building the techniques and the approaches, and also being reactive and saying, hey, we want to improve our launches and we want to make sure they go through a diligence process of being evaluated, and where we can make thoughtful decisions about whether or not certain technology should be launched or not. But most importantly, right, throughout all of this is about how we be intentional about what we're building through every part of the product design and development process. And I did want to share this because, it's an exciting launch that we had yesterday from Google, which is the Pixel Real Tone, which is an effort kind of across the company to really build a more inclusive and more equitable camera experience. And what we found is that we had to do that in a number of different ways. We had to improve face detection performance across skin tone. We had to improve auto white balance, our auto exposure models, blurriness. And so throughout the process, this was developed in partnership with the community. And I think what we were so excited about was we pulled in a bunch of image experts who are celebrated for the kind of imagery that they do of people of color. And those individuals gave such thoughtful, actionable, engaging feedback that we were able to take that feedback and actually leverage it to make sure we were making the right improvements, to truly hammer in and hone in on where the camera was failing and how we could make that better. And the reason I give this example is not just because I think it's an exciting push forward for Google, and I'm really proud of the team who's done so much of this great work, but because I think it really shows that building this is not just about throwing on a particular model change or assigning a particular improvement, but the way you think about the process, building in the right expertise and the right individuals, making sure that you're doing the due diligence with communities and being thoughtful about where in the process those changes need to be made. So with that, I'll stop there. I know we're way over time. I apologize, Shilpi. But we've made a lot of progress, I think, hopefully as a company and as an industry, but we're just getting started. And I think there's so much work that still needs to be done to improve the culture of our companies and our communities, to make sure that more voices are included in the room so that we are making products that are thoughtfully and intentionally designed. But I am excited that if we can set up some of these processes, that we can keep sharing and building this knowledge together, that we can get to a place where more and more products are building this into their process, and we're seeing more and more products have an effect that is way more inclusive. And I'll stop there.
Loved it, Tulsi. You just nailed it. Such a great speaker. I loved your process. I love the thought process behind, making a change is not easy, and to be actively involved in the design and the thought process end to end, getting all the teams involved, not working in silos, just like you said, like you talking to the product teams and talking to the design teams and the implementation teams, and it's you have to change. It has to start from the culture within, right? And I seems like from what you are sharing, Google is doing a great job with that. There's always more that you can do, but you got to start somewhere, right? So
definitely much more to do, but I think we're trying to push forward and continue learning from that for sure.
Awesome, great talk, Tulsi. And do we have any special? I know you answered the shared vocabulary question, so thank you for that. And I do not want to bring up that controversial topic right now, so we'll let that one go. And there are more comments. People are going to be engaging with you, asking questions. So Tulsi will be around, and she's on LinkedIn, and we would love to invite you to even join our community. Tulsi, we have an active. I know we talked about it, but we would love to have you
Yes,
and do more.
absolutely. I would love to. And you please do. If anyone has questions or wants to talk more, please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. Always happy to connect, and Shilpi will talk more. I'd love to be more part of the community. So looking forward to hopefully talking more with all of you.
Thank you, Tulsi. Take care. Bye bye.